Who are you going to betray?
You have 6.
Okay, well, you're going to betray the French so that tomorrow you can take advantage of your traitorous activities.
Okay.
Well, if you're taking over from me, you'll probably stay French tomorrow.
There's somebody.
Yeah, I'm not.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. If we win 24.
Yeah.
I can show you what the scene looks like behind me here.
Oh,
Japan.
wow.
Quite a big
Impressive.
table area.
Really
And
impressive.
just over here, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
how many
quite a lot of
player
stuff.
in each
We
how
have,
many player in each?
We have about 10 players on each side. So
Okay.
quite a big event.
Yes, it seems. Okay, so I download it. I will share
You
it
don't have it?
soon.
Don't worry.
Yeah, yes.
I can probably.
Okay,
I can do it from
open
my end if you need, you know?
Yeah, but I will try. We will try first with sharing. So let's.
Yeah, sure. It usually works. It should work for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. It should. I share. Where is share here? Because it is in French, of course. Here it is.
Aha!
Do you see my
Perfect!
screen? Perfect.
Parfait!
Great.
Tout bien! Excellent. Okay, we're all set. Good. Look, give me 2 minutes. I'll get everyone to sit down. I will do a short introduction of yourself, and then we are ready. We can get going. Okay?
Okay.
Let me
So
just get
let's
everyone
go.
settled down. Okay, guys, can everyone please take a seat? We're just going to have the talk now. If you've got coffee, either put it back in the conference area or put it on the map.
Yeah.
Steve, Jeff, can you please come and sit down?
You know what? I got this.
Jeff, you can do it later. Come. All right. Hopefully, maybe 2 more seats. And there was 2 more here. Jeff, there's a seat here for you. Steve, have a seat, yeah.
As long as you haven't put me next to Craig, I don't.
Next to Charles, I think.
That's all right.
All right, you okay? Yeah. You okay? Neil? All right, that's fine. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. I just introduce our speaker today. Obviously, Stéphane Thion, who has very kindly agreed to provide us with a talk on this battle, the Battle of Rocroi. Stéphane is a very eminent author, very authoritative on the French army of the 30 Years' War, and in particular in this particular part of the 30 Years' War. He's written extensively on that, and he's actually published on the battle itself as well. So it's really fantastic that Stéphane has agreed to speak for us today. Actually, there's not so many people who actually know a great deal about this battle, particularly in England. There's virtually no one. So we're really honored in having Stéphane as our speaker today, and it's great to have him with us. Stéphane, I'll now pass over to you, and your audience is ready.
Okay, thank you, everyone. First, well, I'm honored to be here with you. First, apologize for my English, even if I should often speak in English in my everyday work. Well, I'm not so fluent, so I will try. Secondly, I am very honored because I'm also president of wargaming, miniature figurine club in France, and we never to date simulate Rocroi. We did Lutzen, but not Rocroi, so it's a very good news to hear that you will play this battle today, or perhaps on the whole weekend. I don't know. Oh yes, okay.
Whole weekend, yeah.
Yeah. So introduce myself out of this hobby part. So yes, I'm doing research and writing on military history for more than 10 years now. I'm not from an historical background, but because I have a PhD in human science, but more in business, management, marketing, and so on. So when I begin to write papers and books, my contribution was more bringing bringing scientific method, but from the business world or psychology or human behavior than historical. So yes, I wrote some books on. The first one was the French armies of the 30 Years' War, and then I also wrote a book in Rocroi and some other battles. So now I'm writing for Elion and Company. So you should know that, and I'm working on books on other period, more the end of the Middle Age and beginning of Renaissance. So here it is for my background. But let's go now to the topic, to what you will do. You will simulate or reenact, I don't know what is the right word today. So let's talk about the Battle of Rocroi. So one of the first question is, well, at the beginning, I will skip in sharing in diaporama mode, if yes, okay. So the first question is, at the beginning, the 30 Years' War was not concerning France, sorry. France was at this time a Catholic state, and France have a lot of business to his own problem between Huguenot, well, Protestant and French. So the first question is, why do France enter the 30 Years' War? Sorry. A few words of, because, well, in UK you used to simulate more the English Civil War. Perhaps I don't know your level of understanding of the 30 Years' War, but 30 Years' Wars begin in 1618. But going back to the roots, in the first years of the 17th century, Rudolf II, who was the emperor of the Habsburg Empire, write what we call a letter of majesty that will grant his Bohemian subjects who were Protestants the privilege to practice freely and fully their religion. Okay. However, he did this reluctantly, and of course, it provokes some quarrel, some problem between Protestant and Catholic. And when the Habsburg Empire when Ferdinand the new emperor, take power, he begins some counter-reform operation. So against this letter, and whenever it was possible, he will intervene in favor of the Catholics in issues opposing the two faiths. So this leads to some problem, and it was a brutal resolution of such an issue in 23 May 1618, an event well known as Defenestration of Prague, that triggered the 30 Years' War in Europe. Well, I don't know if, no, I didn't. The defenestration of Prague was in fact not, I mean the Catholic envoys who were in Prague wasn't really hurt because there is they fall from a small distance, but nevertheless it was the event that triggered 30 Years' War. 30 Years' War. So here is some very interesting dates. So the beginning of the 30 Years' War with this defenestration of Prague. 2 years after, there was a first battle between Frederick, whose name was Winter's King, because he don't reign very long period. So it was a victory of the Catholic side on the Protestant side. With a very general who became very well known because he will be successful for more than 10 years, Baron of Tilly. So 3 years later, Tilly won another battle at Stadtplan against an army who was led by Christian IV, who was king of Denmark, because at this time Denmark entered the war. The same 3 years later in 26. Then Tilly won again a battle in Wolfgast. No, it was Spanish, I think, in Wolfgast, never mind. And so this long series of defeats on the Protestant side trigger the enter of Sweden in the war. And so in 6 July 1630, Gustavus Adolphus, king of Sweden, land in Pomerania. There is still a pseudo victory of Catholic side with the massacre of Magdebourg, that is to say, the siege and the massacre of Magdebourg, which is well known and which is, or how can I say, a dark event in the life of Tilly. But after, when Gustav Adolphus began his campaign in northern Germany, he began he won a quick battle, the 17th September in Breitenfeld. Then there is a stalemate in a siege, and then in Lutzen it was also a battle, but the last battle for Gustavus Adolphus, because he met during this battle his death. However, there is still some victory, and 1 year later, Swedish won a battle against Lorrainers, that is to say, Duke Charles of Lorraine, which is a part of France now, but at this time, the Duke of Lorraine was on the Catholic side. So this is before France enters the war. And so in such situation, why did France enter the war? This is because France have at this time a minister, which is Richelieu, and he has a specific view. He made reason of state, la raison d'État in France, the cornerstone of his conception of diplomacy and politics. That is to say, he will put, the priority will be doing things that go on the side of the state rather than the religion. He is considered one of the major founders of the modern state in France with this kind of politics. So let's have a look on the political situation of France at this time. In fact, at this time, France was surrounded by the Habsburg. Habsburg from Spain, northern Italy, but also here in Netherlands and in Belgium, today Belgium, but also Franche-Comté, who is Spanish at this time. So France politically was surrounded by Habsburg, and of course here it was the Austrian Empire, the Germanic Empire. So he feels surrounded. So in 1629, Richelieu writes to the king that he should halt the progression of Spain as often as possible around France. He said he wanted to prevent this nation from increasing its domination and extending its frontiers. France have to think of a strategy including fortification and trying to have around some states that are neighbor states that are friendly of France. Okay, so in this extent, Richelieu ordered before France enters the war. Richelieu tried to fix some issues, to have some external action. The first one was he tried to break what we say the Spanish Camino, the Espanol Camino, that is to say the path of Spanish that allows Spain to bring armies in the north here, and so to threaten France here. So they try to break this path with entering a conflict in Switzerland, which is Valtelline. And so France, Richelieu, sent an army in Valtelline, commanded by a Protestant general whose name is no, the first one was a Catholic, and later he sent a Protestant general very well known in France, whose name is Duke of Rohan. He also intervened in a crisis, succession crisis in Mantua, in Tuscany, where here in Italy, in 1629 and 1631. So these were first action, but this was not officially a war declaration. That is to say, at this time, there is no officially a war between France and Spain, for instance. So here, this first letter was in 1629. Later, in 1622, Richelieu wrote another letter to the King of France, giving him some scenario of how France have to behave in regarding the 30 Years' War. The first solution was to join with the King of Sweden and to wage open war against the House of Austria. The second one, who exclude very quickly, was to take the side of Spain. And then there is two other solutions which with different degree of entry in war. However, so in 1632, the King of France never chose the first and the second scenario. He still tried to act without entering really in war, and he had first to deal with rebellion of Lorraine. So in 1633, 1634, he didn't choose to enter war, but he fixed the issue in Lorraine with the Duke Charles, who, as I said before, was in the chose the Catholic war because he was a Catholic duke. So he was on the side of Austrian Empire. So now let's have a look of what happened from after 1633. The problem is that in 1634, the Sweden army, at this time, France only gave money to Sweden in order to finance their war. The Swedish army, or the German-Swedish army of the Protestants, part of the Union, Protestant Union, lose an important battle 6 September 1634 in Nordlingen. This was a huge victory of the Habsburg, of Spanish German Empire army. So this is this heavy defeat of Sweden that triggered the entry of France on the side, on the Protestant side. So this is Philip has this slide, so you will be able to read it if you want. But in a few words, Richelieu conceals the world in this way. After having spent much time protecting ourselves from traps and continuous enterprise against this kingdom, well, it was a way to explain war. We are obliged to enter into open war with them, a war which we declare. So they declare war following this defeat of Nordlingen. So now, 1635, France declared war against the Habsburg Empire, that is to say, against Spain, but also against the Habsburg German Empire. So here is the beginning of war. In 1635, 1635, yes. France have an army in Picardy, which goal was to join with Netherlands, because Netherlands was part of the alliance. An army here against Franconie. There is an army in Lorraine because of the revolt of Duc de Lorraine. There is an army in Valteline, this time commanded by the Duke of Rohan. An army of Italy because Northern Army was Spanish. And there is not yet army here. But of course, there is an army with the king personnel, with the French guards and all gendarme company of the king and the queen here. And Richelieu take to his to France service the Weimarian army. That is to say, Bernard, Duke of Saxe-Weimar, at this time, following Nordlingen battle, he detached from Sweden. He want to go his own without being under Sweden, and he enters the French service. So also France are the army of Saxe-Weimar, and this army was in Alsace here. Later, in 1636, because Spanish have a successful offensive here, Louis XIII and Richelieu are also new army, one in Bourgogne and two in order to fix Spanish here in Roussillon and here in Guyenne. Okay. So we are still in 1635. How? Let's have a look on the period between the France coming in war and Rocroi. So this period begins by a small victory, French victory in Belgium. In Italy also there is some in blue. These are French victory, but quickly Spanish with an army commanded by Piccolomini, who was an Italian general, very successful and good Italian successful at the service of the Habsburg Empire of the Austrian. So they win some victory, and they make a breakthrough through Corbie, which is between Belgium and Paris. So there is at this time the king raised a huge army who succeed in stopping the invasion. In the same time, there is still some French victory in Italy, one in southern France, in Roussillon, but there is also some defeat. One important defeat, again in front of Piccolomini in Thionville. My personal name has no connection with this town. These etymology are different, but it was imperial victory in 1639. Then there is still a lot of French victory, but mainly in Italy. France lose a victory against the Duke of Lorraine in Sedan, and the second defeat in front of Spanish, this time in Honnecourt. There was also in Roussillon, following the victory of Locate, now French army was in Catalonia, in Spain, Catalonia, and there is still a victory in Spain, but this battle in the north of France, in Picardy, the situation was difficult. So this defeat in Honnecourt was painful, and even if globally 1642 and with a global advantage of the French, Swedish, and Dutch, Honnecourt defeat, which was followed at the end of 1642 by the death of Cardinal Richelieu, was problematic. At this time, in Germany, there is a lot of party of protagonists who try hard to lead to peace, and so there is a path to peace. But France and Sweden don't really want this peace. Oxenstierna, who is the chancellor, the equivalent of Richelieu in France, bring in the Protestant side the King of Transylvania to the well, it was not now. It was not yet a Protestant side because there is France, and France chose the politic objective rather than the religious reason. But there was they had a new ally in the alliance with Rocroi, King of Transylvania, and as I said, because there is a firm advantage, they don't really facilitate the work of the peaceful part. And in Spain, in the beginning of 1643, Olivares, who is also a very good minister, like a very important minister like Richelieu was removed from power. And finally, in May 1643, there is also the death of Louis XIII, King of France. So the situation was really changing. And there is a political discussion, debate in France on if France will go on on war. Just before his death, the King of France gathered his council in order to declare what happened after his death. So the Queen will assume the regency of the kingdom. His brother Gaston d'Orléans will be the lieutenant and so head of army. The Prince of Condé, who was the main family in France and who was from time to time threatening the power of the main branch who was the House of Bourbon, was named head of the council, and Cardinal Mazarin will replace Richelieu as main minister. So there was a lot of intrigues. That's what usually happened when the king died, and quarrels at the course. And in fact, the Spanish tried to use this momentum, well, this problematic political situation in France, to take advantage. And so they begin a French invasion, and doing so, their objective was Rocroi, the town of Rocroi. So, meanwhile, Francisco de Mello intends to sidestep the armies of Champagne and Picardy, and so he makes siege below Rocroi. Exactly, and try to seize Rocroi. And his plan was to enter France until Paris. And so at this time, there is the problem was following the defeat of Hononcourt, who will command the army of Picardy, who will try to counter the movement of Mello. It was the son of the Prince de Condé, because at this time Angier was not the great Condé, he was only the Duke of Enghien. He was appointed general of the Picardy army by the king shortly before his death, but because he was still young, he gave an experienced commander who was the Marshal of l'Hôpital as his lieutenant general. The idea is the prudence and the experience of l'Hôpital will moderate the ardor of the young Condé d'Angier. So now, let's go to the point, to what's to the aim of this day. That is to say, the Battle of Rocroi. So let's talk. I'm sure you have a lot of information of both armies, because before beginning to paint or using existing miniatures, one of our very interesting part of the hobby is to gather information of armies. So I won't take a lot heavy part of this conference and this part of the battle, but let's stay regarding infantry. Usually, one of the mistakes who is usually done is that the armies of the end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century, people usually see the Spanish armies as it was before, at the beginning, and even at the beginning of the 30 Years' War. But even at the beginning of the 30 Years' War, the Spanish don't really use the traditional tercio as we see it. The Spanish squadrons, sorry, are no longer big squares of 3,000 men. Like the French, because during the 30 Years' War, there is imitating tendency, that is to say, armies used to imitate the best of what the enemies or allies do. So at this time, infantry foot battalion, the name was squadron in Spanish and battalions in France, have roughly the same size. The mean of the size of a squadron, Spanish squadron, was around 900 men, and for French it was slightly below, something between 850 men to 900 men. So this was very classical battalions, and during the course of the war, that is to say, even from the in the 10 or 15 years that will follow, in the 5 years who will follow Rocroi, the size of battalion and squadron will still lower to join 500, 1,600 men by battalions at the end of the war. So here's the first point. Usually you have, like in the English Civil War, battalions with 1/3 of pikemen and 2/3 of musketeers. However, keep in mind that in this battalion, in regiments, there is part of the men who were used for other missions. So for Rocroi, the Spanish send between 500 and 1,000, depending of author, musketeers to hide in wood, and so they were take out of existing tercios. And for the French, I will refer later also to Gassion. Gassion, who was a general who was commanding the French right wing, so the cavalry on the right wing. And Gassion have made his arms with Swedish. So the French cavalry have command shot musketeers between his squadron. Something like 11, in my memory, shot companies of 215 men, so around 3,000 men. So these 3,000 men were taken off of the battalion. So at the end, there is still not really 1/3 of pikemen and 2/3 of musketeers. Perhaps there was only 60% of musketeers and 40% of pikemen. But globally, this was the appearance of a squadron, Spanish squadron, sorry, or French battalion. Cavalry, again, also, it was the same for Spanish and French. At this time, cavalry was in squadron of around 2,200 horses. Roughly here, 220 horses. And the size of squadron will go on diminishing until the end of the war. At the end of the war, French squadron will be more 120 horses, but at this time, here was roughly the size of the squadron. Cavalry was mainly now, well, in cuirass. There is a few. They were mostly armed with sword and shot, mainly pistols. There is at this time a very few lancer. Spain go on to have some guard unit equipped with lance, but it was anachronic. Regarding heavy cavalries, France have some gendarmes units, a few one in Rocroi, and Spain should have mainly perhaps on his right wing with in the Lorrainer cavalry some heavy cavalry, that is to say, which are not fully armor, but between 1/2 and 3/4 armor. So you have some example here. Here is in the French on the right, and you see that he has not a full armor, no mortar set, but there is some arms were protected. And here is an example of how can be a heavy Spanish cavalry. But mainly they were 3/4 only. Sorry, they have only one cuirass, hat, and mostly like in the English Civil War. Here we call this kind of helmet capelin, but there is the same kind of head protection in English Civil War. So now let's have a look on the battlefield. No, just before the battlefield, let's have a look on the parts of the French army. So French army with Enghien gathered his army at the beginning of May, and then they go to Saint-Quentin, Fragny, Bossus, and then they go on to Rocroi. And here is the situation. So the French will enter the battlefield from this road and this ward, while the Spanish were besieging Rocroi. Okay, Rocroi was still French, and the Spanish army was besieging Rocroi. So on the 18th May, the French army will cross this wood and will enter the battlefield here. And they will succeed in doing this without reaction of Spanish. Desmelot was perhaps too confident, and he let, and it was probably a mistake, he let the army deploy. It will be a real problem if he deployed his army here in order to counter the French deployment. He didn't do that. So let's have a look on how the battlefield look. Well, just go here. In fact, here is a map of the middle of the 18th century of how the battlefield looks like. The battlefield is here, and we see that here on the left wing there is a marsh and a wood, and there is a wood here, so there is not so much place to deploy. Okay. So let's let's have a look on French deployment. French deployment is not a problem. We have a very clear look, and because we have the order of the battle order, and so what the instruction were given match what Beaulieu, who drew this map, what Beaulieu has drawn. Okay, so you have here the French battalion, you have here the French cavalry with the command shot here. There is a reserve, zero reserve. So I suppose you have all the information before beginning your simulation, but no problem on French deployment. And here is exactly the instruction that are given, and then even the distance between each battalion. I suppose you have this information. So we have a third line, two line of cavalry in France, French deployment. Here, fusilier and so on. Here we have each battalion going to the right wing with Picardy. Well, you know, in the French army, you have some old corps that is to say the older one, and these are the best one. And in this, but in Rocroi, you have Picardy here, who is the old regiment. On the left, you have Piémont. You have also the little old, the Petit Vieux with Rambure here. La Marine became an old. You have some Swiss here, which are mercenary. You have also Watteville, who is Swiss. We have the Scottish Guards, the Rogue Regiment, who was also a Swiss regiment, and other regiments are later Allied regiments. Okay. And we have the cavalry on the right, with some Croats here, light cavalry. Guards, and you have some very good regiment, Royal Regiment, who made two squadrons, and the same for Mestre de Camp, and after you have some other regiment. And here is the reserve with the gendarme, who will here, and other cavalry regiment, Siro, and I don't remember the name of this one. Okay, so now, let's go to the Spanish deployment, and we have some issues with the Spanish deployment, and so you will have this issue in simulating Spanish deployment. Vankar, who wrote a relation of the battle, said that Spanish deployed in the front line with 5 Spanish battalions. Behind, there is 3 other battalions, and 1 Italian and 1 Burgundian one. Again, there is a 4th line with 5 Walloons battalions in the rearguard, and then again in reserve, below 5 German battalions. So it was a strange deployment in 5 lines. This relation was, well, more or less confirmed by the Duke of Albuquerque, who command the left cavalry wing of Spanish. He said, he wrote that and he was contesting Fontaines, who will command the Spanish infantry, and he was contesting because it was before the defeat, and he tried to justify what's happened. So he said that Fontaine placed 5 squadrons of Spanish infantry facing the enemy, all the other face the side flank, which is a translating and perhaps not a very precise translation. He really says that in Spanish, hacían frente al sesgo por los costados. That is to say, perhaps a more true translation will be facing the bias by the side, and the bias is not a very clear name. So let's have a look of what can happen. If you take Beaulieu drawing of the battle, you will see this deployment. In red, the Burgundians, in red and yellow, the Spanish, in green, the Italians, Walloon in yellow, and German in yellow, in red and black here. So this is what you see in this plan. I will show you later. But this is, it not seem that it was a real deployment. If we follow Vincart and Albuquerque can be also interpreted this way, but I think both suggest this kind of deployment in 4 lines. Okay. And the Duc d'Aumale, who was a very who write a very well-known life of Condé, of all the Prince of Condé, and try to really translate what different sources says. He interprets saying that, in fact, it was not this deployment, but this battalion was moved here, this moved here. It was not exactly depending on interpretation. He suggests a second Burgundian battalion, and he suggests this kind of deployment. So we don't really know what's happened. Additionally, there is another testimony who will add some confusion on Spanish deployment. On the French side, there is a French colonel whose name is Mombas and who writes a letter to his wife. And he is a very, very interesting testimony of what happened on French right wing or Spanish left wing. He was at the head of the royal regiment. And it shows where remember, on the extreme right wing where you have the Croats, and just at the beginning of the right wing you have this old regiment whose name at this time is Royal Regiment. At one point during the battle, early, Gassion, who was at the head of the right wing, point out to Mombas, and this is in the letter that Mombas written. So he pointed out two Spanish battalion, 200 pace ahead, one of Spaniards and the other of Italian and Walloons, each with more than 3,000 men. That is to say, at this, well, perhaps they're mistaken of they join different squadrons because they don't say the space between them, or perhaps at this time battalions have merged, different battalions have merged in big units. And so Gassion asked Mombas to charge them. He asked Mombas to take 2 squadrons in order to charge the Italian and Walloon battalion on the right, and Gassion takes the head of the Spanish one in order to charge the other squadron. So this was where action takes place. Royal regiment who have to, logically, because it was during the first part of the battle, it should happen on the right wing, French right wing and Spanish left wing. However, now, if we understand what Mombas has written, if we understand this, Gassion on his left half will charge an Italian Walloon big squadron, and Mombas on the right said that if he will charge a Spanish battalion. So this means that at this point there is an Italian Walloon battalion on the right squadron and a Spanish one. But if you take all of this situation, this can happen on the right wing. This situation can be. And if the only place where you have this kind of combination is here or on the other wing. So this is problematic because this adds some confusion on the real deployment of the Spanish armies. Mombas and Gassion were on the right wing, so it can happen here, it can't happen here. So I think this deployment don't work. This deployment can work because at this time we can have this battalion who has fled, and it can happen with some, well, but I suggest that this was really the Spanish deployment, okay? But still, there is an issue. We have no real view of what happened. So now let's go back, go through to the battle. And here is how it happened if we take the hypothesis, and I took this hypothesis, this hypothesis of Spanish deployment. So at the beginning of the battle, La Ferté here, who was the French, who commands the French left wing, made a mistake. He too early tried to attack. It was in bad condition, and in fact, he was overwhelmed by Spanish cavalry, who was in fact Lorrainers commanded by Isambo. So at the beginning of the battle, here it was a French defeat. At the same time, Gassion, and Anguien was here, ordered the cavalry to overwhelm the Spanish musketeer in the wood and to try to attack, but if we follow Abulkerk words in his letter at the beginning, Abulkerk succeed in repelling French cavalry and even attaining this artillery. So what I understand is here there is some Spanish squadron who have the upper hand, and here because our cavalry were more extended, Gassion with Montbas here succeed in turning Spanish left wing. So let's go. So here Spanish have the upper hand, but French reserve with Siro succeed in counter attacking. It seems that infantry don't move, and here cavalry succeed in repelling all the Spanish cavalry on their left wing. Okay, and so here at one point all Spanish cavalry flee. Here we counter attack, cavalry reform, French cavalry reform, and all the cavalry also on Spanish right wing was repelled. So at one point, just before, here we really have on the French right wing, French white wing. I come back to the action of Montbas and Gassion. On this wing, there is the regiment who really did well, were the older regiment of cavalry, and including the one commanded by Montbas. So at one point, there remained only the formidable infantry of the Spanish army. And the anti-army then have in French, well, there is the anti-French army who have who face a part of Spanish infantry because Italian battalion squadron have already fled, German also. So the last battalion was a Spanish one with some old Italian squadron, Walloon squadron, and it was only the last Spanish infantry who stayed in the battlefield. Okay. So at the end, finally, the Duke of Enghien came up with so the problem was that the Spanish infantry, there is still one Spanish squadron who was fighting, and at this time Enghien was fearing that the Spanish army was waiting for the Bec cavalry army who fled to join, and the time was flowing, and so Enghien was fearing that Bec can join. So he tried to obtain from the last Spanish battalion, who was commanded by Garciés, a very old colonel and a general. And so he tried to propose them a capitulation. You have to know that capitulation usually was agreements done with places, not armies. It is during in order to have a city that capitulate. But they propose them a capitulation, that is to say that they could leave the battlefield with their arms, with their colors, and so on. After the first time they disagree, but after another Spanish battalion was crushed, the last one agreed to surrender. So the last squadron, after refusing at first occasion, will finally surrender as well. So, and let's finish in order to lay to some time to, if you have some question. Let's have some lessons for a victory. So Rocroi was, at the beginning, it was a very, very disputing battle. It couldn't have half goes to a side of the other. But because of the action of Zero with the reserve and the fact that Spanish don't have this kind of decision, it was at the end a French victory. I think it will be a very, very, it's still a very interesting battle to replay because, well, every side has his chance. So, in fact, Rocroi, from my interpretation, is mainly a victory due to initiative on the French side and because of Lios. In fact, the commanders on the French side were younger than on the Spanish side. Enguer was a very young. It was at the end. It was very young, so you have the impulse or the impetum of the youth. Gassion was still a young general of only 34 years. Siro, at the head of the reserve, was 37. Laferté-Senator, who made the mistake on the left, was not so old. 43 years is still a young age for a commander, but Marshal de l'Hôpital was 60 years old. On the Spanish side, Francisco de Melo was 46, but Fontaine was 16 years old. December 59 words, and he really behaved rightly in the battle. But Abulkar on the Spanish was also young, but he was alone in his army. So this victory was truly that of Duke of Enghien and Gassion, ably assisted by Siro, and probably, well, l'Hôpital roles is not such decisive. So I will conclude with this. Indeed, the initiative came from the younger leaders, and I think here is the lesson of this victory. And thank you.
Very much, Stéphane. That's been great.
Thank you. Do you have questions?
Yes. I may just kick off with one question, Stéphane. You mentioned General Beck, who was commanding, I think, something like 4,000 Spanish or imperial troops, who
Exactly.
was expected to reinforce the Spanish forces, but in the end did not turn up until perhaps very late on in the day. And I wonder whether this battle is a little bit like Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. The Emperor Napoleon, he was waiting for Grouchy, but Grouchy never came. And
Exactly.
this is maybe said to be part of the reason why the battle was lost.
Yeah.
Is it the same here? Is it because Beck failed to appear that de Mello lost the battle? What's your view?
Yeah, there is two on the, because in fact, well, the age can be the only factors, and you know that usually reasons are multifactorial. There is two main reasons on the Spanish side. Rather than what Albuquerque complained, that is to say, Spanish deployment can't have been a problem if it have been. It can also have been a strength, but there is two main reasons. The first one is, I think, the overconfidence on Melo, who let the French army deploy. That is to say, he had the time to counter the French deployment. And the second one is Beck. He was waiting for Beck, and it is also one of the reasons why he don't, at the beginning, was probably overconfident. If Beck arrived with 4,000 more troops, and so he will arrive, in fact, on the side of Enghien and Gassion, I think he can change the way the battle have. But yes, Beck at one time, in fact, he received an emissary, an envoy, and who too early said that the battle was failed. Was a defeat, and also I don't remember exactly the reason, but he was he was not as quickly as he should have, exactly like Grouchy for French army in Warsaw. Totally agree.
Thank you. Any questions for Stéphane before we finish off today? No? No. Okay.
I will have a question. I will have a question. So, which how you choose to deploy the Spanish army for your?
Well, we've given the Spanish a little bit of a free option in terms of how they set things
Okay.
up, although they have a restricted area within which they have to deploy. So they can't deploy too far forward. We're giving the French the chance to come through the woods and to have a deployment. Otherwise, it's a very difficult battle for France. So we allow
Yes.
the French to come through the woods, but the Spanish will be able to have a more flexible deployment. So maybe they will correct the mistakes of the deeper formation that was criticized by Albuquerque. We'll see how it works today. Stéphane, thank you so much again for helping us. It's been a fantastic talk, and maybe one day we'll have you come and visit us, and we can
Perhaps
you can see it set up.
for your information, I will come in Partisan in order to meet Elian. So if some of you go to Partisan in May, I will be there.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stéphane.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Have a
I'll
good
be in
day.
touch, Stéphane. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.